Welcome back to Sane Auto. And don't do anything you see in these videos. You could end up burnt, bruised, or bleeding just like me.
But if you do, you can save this much money, give it to your wife, and make her happy.
If you're watching this video, it's because you're awesome. And you're about to learn something that makes you even more awesome. The tools you need to carry you off from this job. Just make sure you've got 4 to 8 hours of working time before you have to use the vehicle again. You're going to take a screwdriver and pop the center cap off, or the hub cap, depending on what you've got. You're going to need a 30 millimeter 12-point socket to take this center nut loose. Now, these center nuts are staked right here where this relief is, and if you take like a flat blade screwdriver or something else and knock that stake out a little bit, it's going to be a lot easier for you to get that nut loose. But there again, if you have the nice Milwaukee Fuel, which happens to be the most powerful gun on the market right now, or if you've got air, you could use the Thunder gun like I have. But this Milwaukee Fuel is so handy. You just right up against here. Make sure you put some pressure on it so you can't accidentally let your nut back off. And just like that, without even having to worry about the stake portion. Now this is going to be hot. Luckily I have lots of calluses, but that's going to be hot when it comes off. And then also, while your wheel is on the ground, because if you're using a breaker bar to do this, you're going to need the tire to be on the ground so it doesn't spin around. Now I have this nice flip socket. It's 13/16 here, but you know, metric is fine. And make sure that bust those loose, but don't take them all the way out because, you know, the wheel is still on the ground. Now you're going to jack the vehicle up and put your jack stands under. Once you're up in the air, get the lugs the rest of the way loose. Remove your wheel. Now if you're on anything other than concrete, your safety stands can sink into dirt. They can even sink into asphalt, depending on how hot it is in your climate. Around here it gets pretty hot, and we do have sinking into asphalt problems around here. So I'm in the habit of taking the wheel and the tire and putting it beside the safety jack, so if something falls, it, you know, I know especially fancy aluminum wheels are very expensive. So if you've got some old steel rims or something you can use for that laying around, that would be much better. But wheels and tires cost a lot less than broken legs. This tool is from Mac. It's a little handheld press that you can use to turn this, and it forces the CV axle back through the hub without having to bang on the CV axle. You don't have to get it from Mac. If I can find one that's of good quality, that's cheaper than the Mac tool, I'll put a link in the description. And you hold this in place with 3 lug nuts. But if the lug nuts are made the way these Prius are, you're going to have to dig through your spare lug nut bin and find some that aren't quite like these acorns. Just make sure you use the same thread pitch and size so you don't ruin the threads on your studs. Next, let's get this cotter key out of here. It's a special cotter key that's reusable. See, it's spring loaded right there. And we get the 17 millimeter nut off of the tie rod end. Now you want to run the nut back down to where the top of the nut is flush with the top of the stud, and back off about 1/4 of a turn. Use 2 hammers, placing 1 hammer there on the top so that you're not hitting directly on the tie rod end. Take the second hammer and smack it till it moves. Once it moves, you remove the nut, and the nut is what keeps you from ruining the threads. And the vibration, it's not really the hitting, it's the vibration from the hitting is what breaks this corrosion loose. Where a ball joint or tie rod fork will always ruin this boot, this method allows you to break it loose from all this corrosion without messing up the threads and without ruining the boot. And here are 2 12mm. One goes for the wire to the speed sensor, the ABS brakes. The other one is to the brake hose. You'll see why in a minute. There's a 10mm back here. Just follow the wire, you'll find it. That holds the speed sensor. Be very careful with this. It's plastic and very expensive. Pry this bracket loose for the speed sensor. Get this speed sensor way over here out of the way. Force the piston back in the caliper slightly. Not a lot, because that fluid is going back up into your master cylinder. You don't want it to overflow. Get these big 17mm bolts that go through and hold the bracket for the brakes. Not these bolts that hold the caliper to the bracket, but the ones that hold the bracket to the knuckle. And if you don't have the Milwaukee Fuel or an air gun to break these loose, you'll have to use a breaker bar or a cheater bar on your ratchet to break them loose, because they are tight. There's the second one down here. Now strap your caliper up with a bungee cord. Now you want to get these ball joint nuts loose. There's 3 of them. And we have a 22mm socket and a 22mm wrench. Now that we have the knuckle on the ground, the bolts that hold the hub into the knuckle are available from the back. They're all the same length. And this is pressed in, and it's corroded. You know, it's steel inside aluminum, so that causes corrosion. So you know it's going to be corroded in here pretty bad. So we're not even going to bother wasting a bunch of time fighting with this thing, and we can just take it over to the press. And for you regular viewers who are watching, yes, I do have my coffee, which is necessary for every quality repair job. Now we got to get creative and figure out how to get this hub bearing pressed out of this knuckle without ruining this backing plate. It exploded out of there. Now we have the steering knuckle, the brake backing plate, which goes here. You'll notice that these bolt holes are wider near the bottom, near the ball joint, and they're more narrow near the top. It goes like this. And then same thing with the hub, wider here at the bottom, more narrow at the top. So the new hub will go in this way. But before we grab the new hub and try to put it in here, we're going to need to clean this area up and put anti-seize in here so that the next person doesn't have as much trouble as we did, and it won't be necessary to use a press. Also sand and clean this surface right here and both sides of the brake backing plate, because the least bit of grit gets in between here, here, or here, and this part of the hub, and the hub will not sit exactly straight and it won't run true. Okay, here's the unboxing. A nice brand new hub here, which of course there will be a link in the description to this hub assembly. And now if you just got the bearing, then you'll be back there at the press for quite some time pressing things apart and trying to get that brand new bearing into this old hub and trying to reuse this old hub here and making your own hub assembly to put in here. But I don't think it's worth the little bit of savings to be doing it that way. I like getting the whole assembly like this and just replacing it as a unit like we're doing here. Now we're going to apply the anti-seize, which there's also a link in the description. I think there's a link to anti-seize in the description of all my videos. Remember, the two wide ones go to the bottom, the 2 narrow ones go to the top. Anything you don't put anti-seize on, put Loctite on. Some people say that you should pull this hub up in here evenly with these bolts. But so far, I haven't had to do that, because once I clean out really well with the sandpaper and then put the anti-seize in there, you can see as it did right here, it just went right up in there by itself. See? I haven't touched it with a wrench or a socket or anything yet, and it's all the way up in there, just pushing them by hand. And these torque to 30 foot-pounds, so make sure you put Loctite on them, because that's not a lot. Okay guys, I went ahead and put Loctite on all the bolt threads except for this one, because it has a cotter key. Now we'll put a little bit of anti-seize right here, so that for the next person it won't be stuck in there. Put quite a bit of anti-seize on the splines right here, so that the next person won't have to use the fancy tool. Always remember, you might be the next person, so even if you don't really, I don't see why you wouldn't care about the next person, but even if you don't, at least do it for yourself. It seems like a good time to put this knuckle back up in here. What do you guys think? Go. These are supposed to be 177 foot-pounds, which translates to 3 burps. See? Like that. There we go. These are supposed to be 66 foot-pounds. Make sure you clean anything that gets on here off, because that will make your rotor run out of true, cause brake pulsation. Make sure there's nothing in the back of your rotor that could get between it and the hub. Again, it could cause the thing to run out of true. You'll have a pulsation. Get these bolts started, and then bring your caliper and bracket down. Run these in quite a few turns by hand. Make sure they don't get cross-threaded, as you would with any other bolt. It's really tight in here to the top bolt, so you have to use an extension. This is supposed to be 101 foot-pounds, and you can't get at it good unless you got an extension. So put a couple of really long wrenches together and really get down on this sucker. Anything over 100 foot-pounds is a lot. Just watch out for the paint on the car. Yeah, there we go. And you have these two 12mm bolts. Now this bracket has a little hook, and it needs to go in this hole right here. And then this has two brackets. It has the bracket for the other bracket for the hose to the brakes, and then the bracket that holds the wire to the anti-lock brake sensor. Then you have this clip for the anti-lock brake sensor, and the sensor itself is put down here, and we're going to put that bolt in there in just a minute. And this one's a 10mm. Which I have just dropped twice. And since it's going into plastic, the normal rules of 6 to 8 foot-pounds on an 8mm bolt, I wouldn't go that tight with it because it's holding that plastic. These bolts for these brackets, you can go ahead and go a full 6 to 8 foot-pounds on these with no problem, because they're metal brackets. There's no plastic here. And I'm saying 6 to 8, not 68. You break them off with 68 foot-pounds. It's time to put the tie rod in, back up in there. If your castle nut's a tiny bit deformed from getting the tie rod out of there before, you can put the nut on there and tap it down on there. Once you get it tapped down on there, make sure that it's just finger loose when you do this. Then you can tap around it like so, and that'll get your top edges of your castle nut all straightened out again. I like to really run it down to yank it up in there, and then back it off a little bit and hand tighten it and get it lined up for my cotter key. By hand tighten, I mean with a hand wrench or a hand ratchet. And I'm going to start looking for the hole with the cotter key. Get that in there. There we go. Now this CV nut would be 159 foot-pounds, which, as we found on the strut bolts, they were 177. That's about 3 burps. There we go. Now you can stake this right here. Take a pick, a punch, or a screwdriver. See how that deformed the metal down into this groove? It makes it much harder for it to back off. Make sure it's clean around the rotor before you put your wheel back on. And make sure you clean fingerprints off of your rotor too. A little bit of anti-seize on the lug nuts, studs. Don't forget to look to the inside of your wheels. Clean off this surface too. That could also make it run untrue. Make it seem like your wheel's out of balance when really it's just not laying flat up against the rotor. If you have nicer wheels than this, you might want to be more gentle with them in cleaning. Make sure you get all your residue off from cleaning. Don't forget your center cap. Now you gotta do is take it off the jack and you're done. Doesn't hurt to grab the wheel, both the 3, 9 o'clock position, 12 and 6 o'clock position. Try to wiggle it around just to make sure. Visually look at everything, grab everything, feel of everything just to double check everything. Then get your jack stands out and take off for a road test. Till the next video, get off the couch and get dirty.